Hey, Destry, how often do you think of the Roman Empire?
Every time you bring it up, I think about it.
Well, we're going to talk about that today on episode 32 of Deep Dive.
It's fantastic. Josh.
Yes.
It is literally the 4th of July, 2024.
Yes.
This isn't just the 4th of July episode. It's 4th of July.
Yeah. Independence Day,
Yep.
as they say, where I'm from. Yep.
And they're all kind of weird. And, man,
We have a different name for 4th of July where I'm from.
Where's it called?
Independence Day.
It's a strange place to live, Pensacola, on holidays like this, because there's a lot of people here.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to the beach, my goodness gracious, my mother lives in Navarre, so there's Pensacola Beach right in between Navarre and where I live. And whenever I drive to go see my mother on holidays, man, I'm reminded, oh yeah, people like to come to the beach here, don't they? After 2 hours of being if I miss it, like 30 minutes one way or another, I'm in traffic that's going to the beach. Either way, that I go visit her. So it's
I'm just not a beach person at all. I mean, I like water, and I enjoy the way the beach looks.
Yeah.
But there's so many things about going to the beach that just doesn't agree with me. One, I don't like traffic.
Yeah.
Don't like being around a ton of people, especially if they're all in bathing suits.
Right.
You know.
Right.
I don't like heat. Don't like sand.
Check.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but you know, it's interesting. I've always, I've never been someone who's enjoyed going to the beach, just like as a leisure thing. That's not how I like to relax.
Josh.
Yeah, it's not how I roll. It's not how I like to relax.
Yeah.
But when I was in graduate school the first time doing structural engineering, we had to spend this one course. We had to spend a bunch of time in this big wave tank where we'd build shorelines, throw waves at them, and see how the waves interacted with the shoreline and the structures we built. Then we go back to the classroom and do math about it. And after that, going to the beach, it was a lot different. I still didn't like the heat, the sand, and the people and all that stuff, but I was mesmerized watching the waves because, like, I understood a little bit more, like, the physics of what was going on there, how the waves refract under, different, like, contours underwater and how it refracts around objects or reflects off of objects. It was weird. It's like I saw it in a whole new way, and I enjoyed it a lot more. But I still don't like the heat.
The heat's always most of the time it's gonna be there.
Yeah, I like going to the beach like in the fall.
Oh yes.
Or in the winter.
Nice.
Yeah.
I used to be a big surfer whenever I was in college and high school, and I loved the beach because the waves were there.
That's usually where you find them,
and that's where I found them every time. And it was I would go to class with. I can't believe I used to do this. This is how I rolled in college. Gosh, this is why I did so well.
Okay,
let me just say that this is why I did so well. I go to school. Flip-flops on, sand in my shoes, and just plop down. My hair's still wet. I might be wearing a hat. I might not be wearing a hat. Looking down, halfway through class, and you see that white residue of sand or salt that's dried up on your arms, and I'd wipe it off, and and try to do my work and all this, and I look outside. Man, look at the sun. It's nice. What time am I trying to go? Okay, we're going to get out of here about this time. I can get down there and get 2 hours of surfing in. I still don't know why I didn't do too well in school. I just can't figure it, man. I don't know. I'd surf. I'd get out of the water. I'd take a nap with my head on the board, get up, go to class.
Right.
This was the first semester whenever I wasn't working. After that, I worked all the time and went to school, but summer school throughout. I went to summer school almost every time because I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
I enjoy statistics so much I took it twice. It was awesome.
Nice.
I finally passed it that second time. So I loved it, but I had my fill of it. You know what I mean? There was a time where I said to myself, I can't even Kansas. Why would I ever want to live anywhere in the middle of the country where there isn't a big body of water with waves? I can't. It just didn't compute with me.
Well, I grew up in the middle of Texas where there's no water, and out in the country. That's what I love. I love going out and seeing like rolling hills, not rolling waves.
Absolutely, right. Well, so I moved here after for however many years after I graduated. I've been to the beach a couple times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just got out. It got out of my system. I can see the draw to it because I used to be there. I mean, there was a time I lived in Wrightsville Beach in North Carolina, and there were times where I wouldn't. It was a small island off of Wilmington, North Carolina. There was a time where I wouldn't come off the island for two weeks at a time if I wasn't going to school or if I wasn't working off the island or whatever. I wouldn't get off and. It's I was warned by some friends of mine, Destry, you're in a very dangerous place because you are just happy. You're laid back. You ride your cruiser around with no shoe. You take your surfboard and you ride to the beach. If you're not careful, this is what you will be because it is addictive. And I started looking at people around me, and I started seeing the older people that were doing what I was doing. Yeah. And I said, man.
Or did you say,
they're right,
dude?
I probably thought, dude. That's probably what I thought. But then I started seeing the difference. I have to stay in school. I can't. I love this, but this isn't where I see myself forever. Actually, living it, whatever. You know what I mean? I just didn't want to get caught in that.
Yeah.
Because there was also some behaviors there that were very unhealthy, that I was participating in. JC, before Christ, I was participating in behaviors that were not good for anybody.
Right.
So thank God. You know what I mean? He drew me away.
Yeah.
And I think it's a perfect example of how Christ can change not just your attitude, but Christ can change your desires. Because there was a time, like I said, that was my life. And I was happy with it. For the most part, I was very happy with it, not knowing how what I was missing in a relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And it's so much better living anywhere whenever you're closer to Christ.
Okay.
So anyway, it was a good time. It was part of building my testimony, because it was a lifestyle. And it was a beach lifestyle, man, and I loved it. But I'm so thankful, and I love so much more now, living 15 minutes from the beach and never going. I'd rather have this.
I'd like to be able to go. Even though I don't.
I could go.
I don't want to go to the party, but I'd like to be invited.
Right. And my cousin Cindy and her husband Buddy and their family are down for the 4th of July, and I will go to the beach.
Okay.
To see them. Now they rent a condo facing the water. When I say on the water, I mean on the water. They are on the 7th floor, I think. And you go on the balcony, and there's the water.
Right.
And it's so they're loving this week that they're here because they get up and they can go down to the beach right in front and then come back and eat and go back down and eat and whatever they want to do. They're right there. I could handle that for a couple of days.
Yeah.
But having to drive to it and all, that's a different story.
I could never live right on the water.
Yeah.
It's nice to like lease or rent a place for a couple days that's right on the water, whatever. But I would never want to live there, mainly because I've been involved in too many like engineering cases where a hurricane comes and damages a place, and there's an ensuing battle with an insurance company, and everything's expensive, all that stuff. Right. I like going back to my roots, being back in Texas and living inland, where I look out and I just see land.
Yeah.
Not buildings, but I might see farm animals or deer or something like that.
Maybe a cow.
Maybe a cow. I grew up and it was not an odd thing to wake up in the middle of the night because some errant cow had gotten out of its pen or whatever and was in your yard mooing away. You know, that was cool to me. Or like going to bed and hearing the coyotes out in the distance going wild.
That's a scary sound, by the way.
Oh, it is.
I've heard that. Man, it's that because one of them starts and then the rest of them start going. And, it's like nothing you've ever heard.
Right.
You know, and I guess they found some food and they're calling their buddies over, their family.
Yeah, that's what happened this one time in particular. I remember they were just going more wild than I was normally accustomed to hearing them. And I went out hiking, you know, next day or day after, whatever, and apparently they had found a calf.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Made dinner out of it.
It's spooky whenever you hear that. But anyway, here we are, and we're gonna record and talk a little bit about.
Well, last week, remember we tried this new thing where we answer a little question about ourselves.
Yeah.
You want to do that again?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So
I
there's
don't
this.
know what you're gonna ask them.
Well, there's this question that was in the. So what I did is I pulled up Chat GPT and I said, there's a Bible study podcast. One guy's an engineer, one guy's is a photographer, and suggest some questions that would serve as a means for the audience to get to know them better.
Good question.
And so last week we did one. So this week the question is, looking back, is there a particular book that you may have read as a young man or as a kid or whatever that was that played a significant role in shaping you into the person you are today, or was meaningful in that way?
A Walk Across America by Peter Jenkins.
Okay.
And I'm so surprised that I can remember that title and author. I guess that speaks to the question.
Yeah.
It was a nonfiction book about Peter Jenkins, who had just, gosh, it's been so many years since I read it, but it was one of the first books I was really enthralled with that I read start to finish. It was about him trying to find himself after he lived through the early 70s.
Okay.
So I don't think he went to Vietnam, but I know he knew a lot of people who went to Vietnam, and it was after that. And I don't think that's a new thought or even new prompting to write a book. But with him, I just started reading, and he bought his dog named Cooper, and I didn't know y'all very well. Whenever I had a dog named Cooper, but he was my family will know he was everything to me. He pretty much grew up with me through college, and I had him for 14 years before Dawn and I got married, and about 7 or 8 years after we got married. Okay. He was 14, 15 whenever he died. But Peter's dog was named Cooper, and they walked from I think it was from east to west across America, and stopped in every town, or stopped in towns, and got to know the culture, got to know the people. He stayed with people, hitchhiked. He worked on a farm to get money to go. That's just what he did. And there was one part about halfway through his journey that he said he was living in a trailer with a family, and he got up that morning to start to do the farm chores or whatever, and he remembered thinking, before he looked in the mirror, he just had this thought: I don't know if I'm black or white. He couldn't recall his race. Because of the lifestyle he had, he didn't look in mirrors a whole bunch. I mean, who knows how long it had been before he had looked at him and really primped himself or whatever. But he was living with an African American family for a long time, and he just got into that culture, and he remembered that this is it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to these people that I'm living with. It doesn't matter to me. Why are we having such a huge problem in the world about all of this. Think about it, was in early 70s,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of stuff going on during that time. And that, I've never forgotten that. I've never forgotten that. And that whole book was, there's just so many things in it. I'd like to go back and read it. But anyway, that influenced me. That book was a heavy influence on me.
Yeah. It's...
What about you, Joshy?
Well, it's kind of a difficult one to answer because there's different books that like influence different parts of me.
You've read a lot more books than me, so you have a lot more to think about.
I don't know about that.
You probably read more books than me.
I've always enjoyed reading.
Yes.
I don't read as many books now.
Mm-hmm.
I take it back. I do read a lot of books now, but not in the way that people normally think. Yeah, not like to sit there and relax with a book that you read cover to cover. I read a ton of informational things.
Building codes.
Yeah, building codes, math, engineering, physics, that kind of stuff.
All that fun stuff.
History.
Yeah.
But as far as like, actually there was a time where I sort of realized that I spend the majority of my time in the left side of my brain, the analytical side, and I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to the right side of the brain, the non-analytical, and so I didn't like that, and so I decided I want to start pursuing some non-analytical things again, things about like art or things that don't require the analytical brain. And so I tried picking up I love music, so I tried to learn how to play an instrument, and that ended up turning into an analytical pursuit because I was really interested in music theory all of a sudden, and
well, that's your nature.
It's my nature.
You're going to have to fight that nature regardless of what you do.
Right, and I did, and I started trying to read fiction again because I realized I hadn't read fiction in years, and but I remember as a kid though, really, really enjoying reading books of all kinds, and one of the is actually a series of books that I think really helped shape my brain into the way I love learning about history. I think was shaped by this one series of books. It was the Chronicles of Narnia, and what I remember specifically about those books with respect to this feature of my brain was, there's two ways to read the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. One is the order in which the events of that book, that series of books happen. Like you start with, I think it's the 6th book, which talks about the origin of Narnia, and you go that way, or you read them in the order they were written by C.S. Lewis. Okay. And I did the second one. I read them in the order that they were written by C.S. Lewis. So the first one was Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is, they've made movies out of it and stuff too. But that's where the 4 children find Narnia, and they start interacting. They get introduced to the main character Aslan, who the Chronicles of Narnia is a big analogy or a type of it. Aslan represents God.
Yes.
And, there's this whole interaction there that's very symbolic of Christ and salvation, all this stuff.
Yeah,
as you go through the books, there's Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then I think the Silver Chair, and it keeps going.
Right.
The 6th book is called The Magician's Nephew, and in that first book, the main antagonist is this character called the White Witch, and the whole book is centered around the battle between Aslan and the White Witch. Well, in the 6th book, it's called The Magician's Nephew, and it's kind of like the origin story of Narnia. And
this was prequel kind of stuff.
Yeah, prequel kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
And here I am as a young teenage kid reading this stuff, and I get to the 6th book, and these 4 children, or the magician's nephew, who ended up being like the old man in the in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Okay.
It was like a story from his youth,
Right.
and he originally discovered Aslan and was there at the origin of at the creation of Narnia. Well, from this other world, there was this green, this evil woman called the Green Witch or whatever, and she ended up like escaping from her world and found herself in the world of Narnia shortly after Aslan created it. And it said that this lady became the White Witch of the world of Narnia because she had transformed, in going from her world to Narnia, she had transformed in her character and her nature and all this stuff. And, it's kind of a metaphor of Satan, leaving heaven, all this stuff. And I just remember reading that part and there was like this weird high that came from that. That was like knowing the origin story of this lady and knowing all of that stuff that went on in that first book, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but then now knowing her origin story and seeing how those originating elements led her to become the villain that she was in this other one. It was so interesting to me, and I kept pursuing that type of insight into other things, and I think that shaped why I'm so interested in history and Bible and stuff like that, because there will be the event you read, but then there will be all of these origin stories that work together and the events of world history that lead up to that. That's so interesting to me. And I think that was like my first exposure to that kind of knowledge,
and that kind of thinking, and pursuit of knowledge. How did we get here? Kind of a thing. How did this person get there? What has made this person who they are? Right.
Yeah, kind of like seeing the episode 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars, and then going back and finding the origin story of Anakin. That's it's like, oh wow, I'm seeing this go on right now, and I can see how this results in all of that stuff that I already know that happens in the future.
Wow,
that kind of it's really, really cool to me.
Very good. I remember watching the movie The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and if I'm remembering correctly. It was animated. The part I saw was animated, and whenever the lion died, oh my gosh, it ripped me apart. It ripped me apart, knowing the background, knowing what it represents, and because it was just on this huge screen, and you just fell in love with this lion, with just beautiful animation. It was and the voice and everything, and whenever he just slowly died. It caught me off guard, man.
Yeah,
it did. It caught me off guard.
Well, when I read them the first time, I read it the first time as a teenager, and I didn't realize that they had been written on purpose to be symbolic of Christ and all this stuff. I reading through it, it kind of dawned on me like there's some similarities here, and this really follows that same pattern. But I didn't know the author had done that on purpose. That C.S. Lewis. This is before I knew all about C.S. Lewis and his Christian background, his apologetics, and all that stuff. I just knew it was a really cool story, and wow, there's a lot of similarities here. Then later I found out, he did that on purpose, and I reread them again as an adult. When my daughter was little, I read them to her, and going through them again as an adult was really interesting.
I bet it was. Very good. Good question, Josh.
So,
good question.
All right.
Excellent. So, we had a guest pastor, pretty much. He's on staff. He's not a guest in the church.
He was a guest to the stage.
He was a guest to the stage. I think he's preached before, I believe. But Preston gave us a sermon last Sunday, and he did a pretty darn good job of it.
And if so, the hook at the beginning, right? I asked how often. There's this question that recently kind of went viral across the internet, and guys were asked, how often do you think of the Roman Empire? And the answer is always surprising to a lot of women, because a lot of guys said, well, I don't know, probably at least twice a week or something, like once a day. And it is funny, my wife and I were talking about that too, and she asked me, like, do you ever think of the Roman Empire? I'm like, well, yeah, all the time. And she's like, why? I'm like, well, because it was a time period in history that's so influential into everything we do today. I mean, even though the Roman Empire no longer exists, it shaped world history in a very significant way, to where anything we think about today of any like historical significance is influenced a lot by the Roman Empire. And so I told him, like, yeah, I mean, especially because I really like history and I'm always researching things in the Bible and stuff. I probably think about the Roman Empire several times a day. And that totally just like was unexpected for her. Yeah, she's like, but why? You know?
well, so my question would be, how? How? If you had to answer, how is it influencing today's leadership? How is it influencing today's society? The Roman Empire, in an elevator pitch, what would you say? How is that so long ago influencing our daily life today?
Well, there's this desire by world empires ever since the fall of the Roman Empire to regain that glory.
Okay.
And as you go through history, people have tried to become the second version of the world of the Roman Empire.
Gotcha.
You know, the Roman Empire was called the First Reich, and the German Empire was called the second. And the second attempt at it by the German Empire was called the Second Reich. And then we know that evil term from the World War II, the Third Reich. That's where Hitler tried to reinstitute the glory of the Roman Empire in Germany and reestablish the Third Reich. But that's why we have czars. You know, that's a version of the word Caesar. That's why in Germany their leaders were called Kaiser, because there's a version of Caesar. And you know, when we had World War I, it was called the war to end all wars, not because it was so violent. I mean, it was, but that was sort of this line that was drawn in the sands of history that said, we're going to try to correct a bunch of things that have been going wrong since the days of the Roman Empire, and we're going to try to hit this reset and make a war that will end all wars, so that we can sort of transition ourselves as a world into doing things a different way. And you know, that's what led to the events of World War I. And then it didn't quite work the way everyone wanted. There's World War II, and so I mean, the Roman Empire, the echoes of that still bounce around the globe today. It impacts, you know, world empires as we speak.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Anytime you say Reich,
yes,
it just conjures up the Third
Right.
Reich. If you say to most people, I would imagine, if you say first, second, third, fourth, fifth, doesn't matter. If it has Reich on the end of
Yes.
it, you automatically start thinking of Hitler, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because you know, he
nasty.
tried to reestablish himself as the third version of the Roman Empire. Yeah.
There's I don't want to start talking about him, but there's so many documentaries. There's so still people are just even producing things today about him. You know what I mean? And they're interesting to see, because the same reason that you said a minute ago, how did he go from a child to where he ended up? When did that change? And, you know, depending on what documentary you read or listen to or watch, it gives you a little bit of insight on keeping in mind that some of it might not be true, might be speculation, but just to see how he came up through the ranks. He was in jail at some point, and he just developed into this person that he was. Yeah. And how he took his own life at the end, if that really, you know, whatever happened there, and his relationships. There are just truly evil people in the world. Yeah. Today, there's truly evil people in the world. Well, and when you look at that from a historical biblical perspective, there are hints of what he did in the Old Testament, because when Israel and Judah, you know, when they fell into their respective captivities, especially Judah, you know, God was talking to them through several prophets, telling them, like, this is kind of a point of no return. You're not gonna come back here for thousands of years, and there's several things that are going to happen along the way. And like in the book of Daniel, it lays out
the careers of like the leaders of the Persian Empire, and then people like Alexander the Great and all this stuff. It lays all that out in really surprising detail. And then in Ezekiel, it talks about how they'll be spread out among the nations, and they'll be going through different periods of persecution and all this stuff because of their rejection of God, just in general, and their repeated rejection of God. And it wasn't until 1948 that Israel finally was able to coalesce again around their original inherited land and create the nation of Israel. It had been that long, a couple hundred years BC to 1948, over 2,000 years, as a result of their rejection of God.
1948. Not that long ago, by the way.
Yeah, not that long ago at all. And the events of their ability to come back and gather again in their inherited land, their traditional land, in 1948. Those events were significantly influenced by the events of World War II and what Hitler, what Hitler tried to do, eradicating the Jews and all that stuff. And they had gone through that type of persecution before, because we think of Hitler killing them all, and we forget about the first Hitler in the Bible, Haman, Esther, trying to kill them all during the time of the Persian Empire. And so I mean it. And then what we're going to get into here during the time of the Roman Empire and the Romans' persecution of the Jews, all of that stuff. God was very clear. Israel kind of put themselves into that situation of being subject to these other pagan world empires because they constantly rejected God and pursued the pagan beliefs and the leadership of those other nations. And so eventually God gave them their wish. And at the same time told them, one day you are going to be restored, but for now I'm basically giving you what you're pursuing. And it's going to trash the entire nation.
Be careful what you pray for, what you ask for.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get into that now. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Last Sunday we dived into John chapter 18, specifically starting in 28, where Jesus is standing in front of Pilate, and they're having this conversation that we're probably all familiar with, but I want to look at it from a historical perspective, because there's a lot going on between Judea at the time and the Roman Empire. So Judea was made into a Roman province fairly early in the first century. In fact, it was, I think, AD 6 is when Judea was set up as a Roman province. And it was a very significant transition in the history of Judea, too, because, going all the way back to the book of Genesis, there's this prophecy that Jacob, who ended up becoming named Israel, and that's what the nation is named after, while he's on his deathbed, he gathers his 12 sons and his two grandsons, Joseph's kids, and he starts going down the line and blessing them all. And he gets to the tribe of Judah, and he says, the scepter will not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. And there's a couple other details surrounding that, but that becomes a very significant statement in the history of Israel, Judah, the tribe of Judah, and just world history in general, because that was a prophetic, a messianic prophecy. It says that that term, the scepter, is indicative of ruling authority. A king holds a scepter. It says the scepter will not depart from Judah until Shiloh come. And that term Shiloh is a reference to, that's another name that is often used for the Messiah. And so basically Judah is going to be the main tribe that leads the rest of Israel, and that will culminate in the coming of the Messiah.
Okay.
And so, as you go down through history, once Judah comes to the throne through King David, because David was from the tribe of Judah, there's always a king from Judah on the throne. And when they go into captivity, even though they're in captivity through the Babylonian Empire, the Persians, all this stuff, they were always the tribe of Judah was always allowed to maintain some aspect of ruling power over themselves. Over time, it became the Sanhedrin, the high court of Judah, and so they always saw that as this long-lasting, multi-generational promise that God gave them way back in the book of Genesis, that there will be some aspect of self-governance that's maintained in Judah in perpetuity until the appearance of the Messiah. Well, then comes the Roman Empire, and there's this animosity between the Jews and the Romans that escalate into battles between the two, where Judah is always trying to rise up and throw off the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire is far stronger and beats them every time, and is getting more and more frustrated with the Jews, until there comes a time when Rome says, you know what, screw it all. You guys are a pain in the butt, and we're going to just end this. And so they come in and they make Judea a province of Rome. They strip the Sanhedrin of any power that they have. They take the high priest out of the temple, and they institute their own high priest, a Roman appointed high priest, not a son of Aaron, nothing like that. It's a Roman guy that they said, okay, you're going to be installed as the priest here. And so they just stripped Judah of any type of thing that made them characteristically different than the people around them. They stripped everything from them. And so, and this was shortly after AD 6, when they were set up as a subservient Roman province. And so the elders of Judah, it's recorded like in books like Josephus and stuff like that, they went through the streets and rent their clothes, and they're walking through the streets weeping, and the saying was, the scepter has departed from Judah, the word of God has failed. So they saw this as the Roman Empire as being so powerful and so evil that they were able to overcome God when the Babylonians weren't, the Medes and the Persians weren't, the Greeks weren't, all that stuff, but the Romans did. Well, the timing of that was significant because that prophecy referred to the coming Messiah, and this happened in the early years of AD, in the year of our Lord. And what those elders of Judah didn't realize was that just before that event happened, Christ had been born. The Word of God didn't fail. The Messiah had come. And so that period of history was over, and now it's all about Christ. And so that's sort of the events leading up to this, because now, 33 years later, we're now at the end of Christ's life on earth. As he's beginning his ministry and all that stuff. And so we're in John 18, and here the Jews who hate Rome are also found to hate Jesus so much that they end up siding with Rome against Jesus. And so they deliver Jesus up to the Romans. And so here's this guy Pilate, who ends up finding himself in the position he is by some really weird means. There was really nothing special about Pilate as a person. The emperor of the Roman Empire at the time was a guy named Tiberius, and the guy second in command was this guy named Sejanus. And Sejanus and Pilate had kind of similar backgrounds. And so there's a lot of thinking that says because they had these similar backgrounds and they were friendly towards each other, they're kind of from the same area of the world, came up in similar families, whatever. Pilate ended up becoming installed as a prefect over the territory of Judea because of his friendship with Sejanus. Okay. So there's Tiberius, the emperor, who's kind of wanting to retire. He's shoving a lot of his responsibilities over on this guy Sejanus. Sejanus is talking to all the different prefects that he's set up that govern different parts of the Roman Empire. Sejanus gives Pilate the leadership of Judea. Pilate's not really interested in Judea. In fact, that's one of the things that Pilate and Sejanus have in common is that they both hate the Jews. However, Pilate's been put in charge of the Jews, and so in order to pacify them, he tries to do these different projects, like let's build some useful infrastructure in Judea that helps make their lives easier. But he used treasury taken from the destruction of the articles of the temple that ended up becoming part of Roman treasury. He used that as funding to do these projects. So it's kind of like adding insult to injury a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't a lot of good relationships between the Jews and Pilate, or between the Jews and Sejanus, the Jews against Tiberius. And yet, they hated Jesus so much that they turned Jesus over to the high priest, this guy named Caiaphas, who, remember, was not a Jewish high priest. This wasn't someone who descended from Aaron. This is someone that the Roman Empire went into the temple, pulled that guy out, and stuck a Roman guy in that place. And at the same time stripping the Sanhedrin, all that kind of stuff. So, but they hated Jesus so much that ended up not mattering. We're going to still submit to this Roman high priest's authority. Mm-hmm. We're going to bring Jesus to him. He's going to bring Jesus to Pilate, who we hate, but we're going to submit to his authority here. And even in those conversations between the Jews and Pilate, they deferred respectfully to Pilate's authority and said, here's a guy that's doing all this stuff wrong. We're turning him over to you so that you can start processing him through the judicial process of the Roman Empire, events leading up to his crucifixion. But it says here in 28, they then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment. That hall of judgment was the palace of Pilate, because it was called, that's where it was sort of kind of like the White House today. It's where he lived, but also where he did business. I think it was later called the Praetorian, but it was formerly the palace of Herod. So a lot of bad stuff associated with this place, and yet they took Christ and said, okay, we're bringing him to this, we're submitting to the authority of this place and the person who lives here, because we want to get rid of this guy. And so you led him to the hall of judgment, and even they themselves wouldn't go into this hall of judgment because, as we've talked about in previous episodes, this was right near the Passover. The crucifixion happened on the night of the Passover, and they were getting ready for the Passover, so they didn't want to step foot into this Roman palace, this hall of judgment, because they themselves didn't want to become ritually unclean because they were preparing for Passover. Right. And yet they took that Passover lamb and just brought him and shoved him in and said, all right, take care of him, Pilate. Right. And it's interesting, the conversation that Pilate ended up having with them and with Jesus. Because verse 29 says, so remember, they took Jesus to it, but they didn't want to go in. So Pilate went outside and started talking to him and says, what accusation bring ye against this man? They answered and said to him, if he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up to thee. In other words, look, we're bringing this criminal to you. What's his charge? Well, we wouldn't have brought him to you if he wasn't a bad dude.
That's it.
Yeah. And he's like, well, so Pilate's like, well, take ye him and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It's not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. So Pilate was basically saying, well, this is your criminal. You judge him by your law. And they're like, well, our law doesn't really allow us to do this, this, and this. And so we're giving it to you so that you can judge him according to your law. Which is an interesting thing, because there, all these different prophecies in the Old Testament specified how he was going to die. Yeah. The death on the cross was not a Jewish death; it was a Roman death, and it was a death that was prophesied before the Roman Empire even existed. And so that's why it says, well, of course they're going to submit him to Roman authority, because he's going to die a Roman death. And the Jews said that our law doesn't allow us to put him to death, which is false, because the things that he was being accused of are mentioned in the law, and there's a death penalty for those accusations. But here again, there was a Passover coming up. They were trying to remain ritually clean for that. They want to just get rid of him, so we'll give him to the Roman Empire, and they'll take care of him. And so, verse 33, Pilate entered into the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said to him, Art thou the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered him and said, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? In other words, are you saying I'm king of the Jews, or did other people tell you that I'm king of the Jews? So here's where we start having a conversation between the Messiah and Pilate. And Jesus said, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. And here's the major distinction between the Messiah that came and the Messiah that the Jews were looking for. Because the Messiah that the Jews were looking for was the one that would come and would fight off the captors, the Roman Empire, and would reestablish the kingdom of Israel forever. That was not the reason Christ came the first time. He came to seek and to save that which was lost. And so in this conversation with Pilate, he tells Pilate, he's like, my kingdom is not of this world. He said, if it were, then I wouldn't be standing here in front of you. There'd be a ton of people attacking this palace as we speak, trying to get me out of here. But my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is of heaven. And so Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? And Jesus answered, You say that I'm a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. And I think that's a really interesting answer Jesus gave, because Pilate's trying to figure out, what did this guy do that's punishable by death? And so he starts interviewing him, asking him, like, aren't you the king of the Jews? No. If my kingdom were of this earth, people would be trying to get me out right now. My kingdom of heaven. Well, are you even a king? And Jesus says, well, you're the one saying I'm a king. But here's the reason I came. It's like, I came to this world that I should bear witness unto the truth. And then Pilate said to him, what is truth? So, that's that philosophical question that we all sort of strive to answer in our lives, is what actually is truth. We're all trying to find that. And I think that was Pilate's way of kind of like conceding that this little debate isn't really going to go anywhere. Like, well, what is truth? You're saying one thing, I'm saying another thing, the Jews are saying another thing. Who's to say either one of them is true? And so, and we read in other accounts as he sort of washes his hands, like, I don't want anything to do with this.
Right.
I can't really find anything wrong with him, but you guys say there is, so just do whatever.
So his attitude, I've always wondered why his attitude was so lukewarm or indifferent to making this happen. So, because he really didn't care about the people he was ruling over.
No, he didn't.
He didn't. And so that like we were talking about before we even started the study, learning where he came from, how he came into leadership, explains his indifference.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he didn't really care about the Jews anyway.
Yeah.
That's what he and Sionis had in common, is they both kind of hated
Right.
him.
Well, this
Yeah.
is just on his to-do list. He wanted to get it off his desk.
Yeah.
Take care of it. I don't care. I got other stuff to do.
Right. But he said, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. But you have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will you therefore that I release unto you the king of the Jews? Then cried they all again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. So it's interesting here. I remember when I was a kid. There's this poem that I think we were told to memorize when I was taking literature or whatever. It's called "I Am Barabbas," because here's the decision that's been presented to the Jews. It's like, here's this guy that you've brought to me, telling me that he's guilty of something punishable by death. I don't really see it. But whatever. This is your guy, so there's this tradition that you guys always like me to do, which is releasing someone back to you in honor of Passover, right? Because of the significance of releasing someone guilty at the Passover. He's like, there's this tradition that I released someone to you at the Passover. Do you want me to release this guy or this other guy, Barabbas, who the Bible says, this guy was guilty. He was a robber. And so, do you want me to release this guy who I don't really find any fault in, or do you want me to release this guy who's a robber? And unanimously, they all yell, Barabbas, Barabbas, give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas. And I like that poem because it says, I am Barabbas, because it says, like, it contrasts me with Christ, and said, two people were standing there waiting for judgment. One who was innocent, and one who was guilty, and it was the guilty one that was let go, and it was the innocent one that stood and took the punishment that he didn't deserve. And it concludes with saying, "I'm Barabbas. I'm the one that stood in that place, deserved judgment, but I was let go, and the person who was innocent took that punishment in my place."
Wow.
Really, really powerful stuff. But that's what's so compelling about this passage of Scripture is knowing Pilate, knowing his background, knowing the details of this conversation between him and the Jews when it comes to the guilty status of Jesus, and how it ended up resulting in the crucifixion. It's a really powerful passage of Scripture.
No doubt about it. Again, the significance of that, the intricacies of Scripture, knowing history, like you've always taught us. The chapters and verses are man-made, put in there so we can all keep up with our readings. In a group setting and individually. But that doesn't stop the thoughts and the flow of the way the Bible is supposed to be read. Right. So we learn about, if you've been a believer more than a year, you've heard this story before. But leading up to that, knowing the stuff that points to that, how Pilate was put in charge and all that, it just brings a different light to it.
Right.
It does. It explains it, and certainly gives you more information more data about why we were there.
Yeah, and it's cool because we read about this in Scripture, and a lot of times we read Bible stuff and we don't really visualize it in our minds as events that actually happened. But
That's
Pilate
right.
was a real guy.
Yeah.
Tiberius was a real guy. Jesus was a real guy.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a huge chunk of rock in Caesarea that has Pilate's name on it. That right outside the palace of Herod the Great. So these were events that happened, and they were instrumental in history. And if you're thinking about them, you're thinking about the Roman Empire.
So perhaps we do think about the Roman Empire more than we say we do, more than we know we do. Josh, we have a guest coming up at the end of this month.
Yes.
That has been to Israel a couple times, and he's planning on going back.
Yep.
And he has some testimonies he wants to tell us about. He told me about it. One of the testimonies he wants to give. He gave to me in the hallway as we were leaning up this hallway this last Sunday. And I said, dude, you've got to come on our podcast and just tell us about this. He's got a lot of them, but this particular one, it just seemingly unprompted. It just is God showing him that he is in control.
Yeah.
And it was just such a simple way of doing it, but so intricate, and so many people that were being used by God, being available, and saying yes whenever it really didn't make sense to say yes.
Right.
But we know that this is God saying, so it's a good story. So the last Thursday of this month, we're going to have Brad Kane come on and talk to us about his experiences there.
All right.
Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Josh, thanks a lot. Chris, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. And Chris brought his better half, and I say that in the most literal way. Jay Dell is here also. Thank you for being here, Jay Dell.
Putting up with us.
And Chris has come back with his care package from Donnie, the Donnie Osmond show that he went to.
Right.
He's got a little bag that he's carrying his stuff around with. It's good looking. Yeah. It's a good looking bag. It says Donnie on it. He said he listened to that podcast whenever I had you convinced that Chris was the Donnie. Jay and I were laughing. Anyway. He didn't even, J.O. told me this morning, he didn't even go to the concert. Right. He just went with her so she could go with her friend from school or old friend to...
he was the facilitator.
Yes, he was a facilitator. And J.L. said that Donnie sounded so good, and he does some things for charity. Some money from the ticket goes to charity, and anything you bought, I think, goes to the bracelet. All the money from a bracelet that she bought goes to charity. What's it called?
City of Hope.
City of Hope.
Yeah.
Cancer and diabetes research.
Cancer and diabetes research. Thank you, J-Dell. So he's doing good. He's out there doing good stuff. So we appreciate him doing that. And thanks for being here, J-Dell. And Chris and Josh. Appreciate it.
And the listeners.
By the way, Josh fell asleep in his car before this podcast. He was late. It was 8:30. We were on, where is Josh?
I was on campus on time, but I was in the parking lot asleep in my car.
So funny. Just fell asleep in his car. I saw it out there.
Yeah.
I thought that was yours, but it got to be 8:30. I thought that must not be Josh's car. I don't know where he is.
It's usually I woke up, Roman Empire.
Guess I better start preparing. Anyway, thanks for being here, everybody. We appreciate it, and thanks for our viewers and our listeners. And I want to say, Cindy, my favorite cousin in the whole world and sister, is at Navarre Beach, and I'm going to go spend time with her and her family, and I can't wait to do that. And we're going to have a impromptu reunion at my mother's house. We didn't know it, but we're going to have like 25 or 30 people there, and look forward to doing that. And I hope everybody gets a chance to celebrate the 4th of July with family. We love y'all. We'll talk to you soon.